That's a big coincidence, isn't it? Yeah, pretty big, yep. But wait, is there such a thing as coincidence? Something that just happens at the right time for no particular reason or purpose, Is there such a thing as a coincidence? No? Only if you don't have faith. It's a God-incidence. Hey, I like that one. I'll steal that one. Yeah. Yeah. God spoke through the prophet Isaiah. Remember the former things, those of long ago. I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me. I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is still to come. I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please. From the east I summon a bird of prey, from far off land a man to fulfill my purpose. What I have said, I will bring about. What I have planned, I will do. God is amazing, isn't he? I mean, really, he is amazing. There really is no coincidence, at least as the world likes to define that word. He can cause things to happen halfway around the world that bring things to happen just after you've prayed about them. You ever had that? I mean, that's so cool. He's just amazing, I tell you. I have seen this just way too often to chalk it up to coincident, if you must use that word, when God is concerned. God-incident. I like that one. Yeah. The other day we were heading through Kelowna for one of those Costco trips that we often go on, when I got this strong feeling that I should stop at the big box store along the way. Now, I could have just as easily gone after Costco, as actually Carmi and Zach were waiting at Costco to shop with us, but I just had this kind of feeling, no, I need to stop there first. Within minutes of getting there, I ran into Eldon Lepke, a pastor friend whose wife also suddenly had this urge to get something from a big box store and dragged him along. Funny thing is, I had been thinking of them and wondering how they were doing, and more so what they were up to these days, because I kind of knew that his last assignment was coming to an end real soon. In case you don't remember Eldon, he's been here a few times, but what he does is transitional pastoral ministry. And so he kind of goes into a church as one pastor leaves before they hire a new one to help that church through what, unfortunately, sometimes is very difficult. It can be a very difficult transition. His work can take him almost anywhere in Canada, but as of late it's been in northern BC and most recently in the lower mainland. Yet here, he and Betty were right there in Kelowna on that particular day. Well, since we hadn't connected for a time, we stood there in the parking lot and we talked for about 3/4 of an hour, mostly about what he called the prayer renewal that seems to be spreading throughout our conference. And that's just wonderfully way cool. So maybe a story for another day. Anyway, was it simply coincidence that I met Eldon on that day? Or was this one of those divine appointments that we heard about again this morning from Scott? That God just so amazingly arranges. Frankly, that sort of thing happens too often in my life these days that I kind of take it for granted. But God knew that I was preparing this particular message for this week, and so he just kind of arranged a quick example for me to have on the day that I was writing it. But I want you to just think of this just for a moment. I mean, we heard about Scott's story as he opened the service today, and he had no idea what I was preaching on, by the way, this morning. None whatsoever. Coincidence. Yeah, I know. But think about it. If I had been reluctant to go up to Kelowna that day and, just carried on with my day, which frankly I mentioned to Linda earlier that morning that, you should just go on your own, I would have missed visiting with Eldon. In fact, if we had left even a few minutes earlier or later that day, we may have missed them. If I had said, I'll just wait until after Costco because, Carmi and Zach are sitting there waiting for us, then I'll go to Big Box, there too. I would have missed the opportunity to reconnect. But somehow, listening to and acting on that little urge within got me to the right spot at the right time. God is truly amazing, I tell you. God works out all things for his purposes in his own timing. With this, he shows you, at least I hope you get it, that you're not here by accident. You're not just the working of millions of years of evolution with molecules that have randomly come together. God sets all things in motion with a purpose and meaning way beyond what we see. Proverbs 16:9 says, in their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. And he is truly amazing, I tell you. We may think that we actually know where we're going. We may have even carefully charted out our course, but in reality, God always has the final word where our steps take us. And get this, it's really kind of cool. Sometimes, if you're actually listening to his voice, he'll give you a heads up. He'll say, this is coming along. Are you paying attention? Well, of course, oftentimes we aren't even aware of what he's up to, and so we're just blissfully wandering into his story. The Bible is actually full of those sort of amazing coincidences, but sometimes we just gloss over them and not see God's grand design in them. Take, for example, the passage that we're going to go through this morning. I've labeled this particular message, we were just talking about you. Because another amazing coincidence happened in his story that shows his sovereignty. So if you have your Bible or your Bible app with you, open it to 2 Kings 8, 1-6, and follow along, or you can read it off the wall. It's a short message from a short passage this morning. Or is it? Now Elisha had said to the woman whose son he had restored to life, go away with your family and stay for a while wherever you can, because the Lord has decreed a famine in the land that will last 7 years. The woman proceeded to do as the man of God said. She and her family went away and stayed in the land of the Philistines 7 years. At the end of the 7 years, she came back from the land of the Philistines and went to the king to beg for her house and land. The king was talking to Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, and had said, tell me about all the great things Elisha has done. Just as Gehazi was telling the king of how Elisha had restored the dead to life, the woman whose son Elisha had brought back to life came to beg the king for her house and land. Gehazi said, this is the woman, my lord the king, and this is her son whom Elisha restored to life. The king asked the woman about it, and she told him. Then he assigned an official to her case and said to him, "Give back everything that belonged to her, including all the income from her land from the day that she had left the country until now." Did you catch it? Did you catch the part where King Joram and Gehazi were chatting about some amazing things that God did through Elisha, when one of those amazing things actually just walked in through the door at that very moment? I mean, did you catch that? What an amazing coincidence, the world would say. Hey, just a bunch of random things happening. Was it just amazing timing? But wait, if you only knew what God had to do to set up this very amazing meeting, you too would be at minimum, kind of scratching your head and going, wow, I wonder how that happened. What on earth just happened here? First, you would need to know the background of the info that was spoken about in that first 3 verses that we read. In verse 1, for example, it says, "Now Elisha had just said to the woman whose son he had restored to life." So when did that happen? Well, if you flip back to chapter 4, verse 8, you would see the beginning of her story in his story. Seems one day Elisha went to Shunem, and a well-to-do woman was there who urged him to stay for a meal. So whenever he came by, he stopped there to eat. She said to her husband, "I know that this man who comes our way is a holy man of God. Let's make a small room on the roof and put in it a bed and a table and a chair and a lamp for him. Then he can stay there whenever he comes to us." Well, it seems that every time Elisha would pass through their town, this woman's hospitality shone brightly and was both noticed and appreciated by the prophet Elisha, who, and actually not only him, but any of those who were traveling with him. As you read on in that passage, you'll find that this woman and her husband had done amazingly well with building wealth, but they had no children to pass their lands and fortunes on to. And yet, it didn't stop them from being very generous with Elisha. Still, it was a gaping hole in their life. And they had long since accepted already that it was permanent. They likely had given up hope of ever having children of their own. But they didn't let that stop them one little bit on practicing hospitality. On one such occasion, Elisha was very thankful to them, and he kind of just wanted to show his appreciation. But just how to do it? What should you do? Should he speak to kings or generals on their behalf? He could. This is a man who walked in those circles. Would have been no problem. Yeah. Should he ask of God to give them more riches? Bless them, Lord. Bless them even more. Just what could he do to show his appreciation? And then it came to him. Well, really, it actually came to Gehazi, didn't it? But Gehazi was more than willing to share with Elisha what he thought could be done. Gehazi told Elisha, "This woman has no son, and her husband, he's old." I like that part. And the husband, he's old, like over the hill. In other words, no heir if the old man should kick the bucket soon. Well, guess what? She was going to have a real rough time fending for herself, as, in those days, her husband's land could foreseeably just simply return to his family. Yep. Elisha saw a simple solution and prophesied, "About this time next year, you will hold a son in your hands." And much to their surprise, it was a done deal. A year later, they were holding their firstborn son. To say she was elated, well, that was an understatement. Amazed? Grateful to God and the man of God? Oh, absolutely. And then it happened again. Oh, not another son, but what would become another amazing touch from the hand of the Lord. As we read on in the same passage, a few years later, it would seem that her son had a cerebral hemorrhage, and he died one afternoon and actually died right in his mother's arms. You imagine the heartbreak there. It was devastating, to say in the least. But she was not going down without a fight. She got permission from her husband to take a servant and go find Elisha, which she promptly did. As Elisha saw her in the distance, he sent his servant to find out what's the problem, who's the issue, what's up. I mean, this is an unusual thing to see her coming this way. She said to the servant, "She's fine." Fine, yeah. Until she got to Elisha. Reading on in 2 Kings 4, verse 27 there, it says, "When she reached the man of God at the mountain, she took hold of his feet. Gehazi came over to push her away, but the man of God said, 'Leave her alone. She is in bitter distress, but the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me why.'" You see, prophets were just as human as anyone else. Elisha could see the distress, but didn't know the cause until, of course, she cried out in grief and agony. "Did I ask you for a son, my Lord?" she said. "Didn't I tell you, don't raise my hopes?" Well, that was enough for Elisha to hear. It was the son, and so immediately he sends Gehazi to take his staff and run, not walk, run to that boy. Elisha said to Gehazi, "Tuck your cloak into your belt, take my staff in your hand, and run. If you meet anyone, do not greet him. And if anyone greets you," this isn't the time to have one of those divine encounters and go on for 2 hours. "If anyone greets you along the way, do not even answer. Just keep going. And when you get there, lay the staff on the boy's face." But speed and staff, they weren't enough. The boy remained dead. And God had destined a greater purpose in that too. Gehazi needed to know for sure that this child was dead. And he even had to go back and report that to Elisha. Otherwise, the chat that we started this morning's passage in 2 Kings 8 would not have had the same testimonial power to back it. Gehazi knew in his heart of hearts that God had done a mighty miracle through Elisha. He knew beyond hearsay, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that that boy was absolutely dead, but by the grace of God was restored to life by Elisha, the vessel of God's choosing. And you can read all the rest of that story. That's in chapter 4 there. But let's get back to chapter 8. Elisha had said to the woman whose son he had restored to life, "Go away with your family and stay for a while wherever you can, because the Lord has decreed a famine in the land that will last 7 years. The woman proceeded to do as the man of God said. She and her family went away and stayed in the land of the Philistines 7 whole years. 7 years. That's a long time. A lot can happen in 7 years. The king was treacherously overthrown by a son whose evil actually knew no bounds. Joram, the king in our passage today, murdered all his brothers to usurp the throne. The famine that Elisha prophesied because of Israel's apostasy came to pass, and so much more. You can read the rest of that in those same chapters. Now, most scholars that I read chronologically put the timing of chapter 8, 1-6, as happening after chapter 4, but kind of before chapter 5 rather than after chapter 7. Hopefully that's not too confusing. Anyway, they believe that since Gehazi is mentioned by name with the king, that these events had to have happened before Gehazi was punished with Naaman's leprosy. And that, of course, happens in 2 Kings chapter 5. More important than those details, though, is the fact that the woman and her family did exactly as Elisha told them. They went away 7 years to Philistia. Being a seaside community, the famine would have been less severe there. At that point in his story, the Philistines actually were not as warring against the people of Israel as they were before, and certainly were after again. And so she was actually able to live there for that 7 years without harm. The scholars also believe that her husband died while she was away, and that is why she, and not her husband, has to approach the king and ask for her husband's land to be restored to her and to the rightful heir, her son. You see, it was not a given in those days that the land would be returned, especially to the wife of a deceased owner. There was no telling which way this ruthless dictator would decide. But as it so happened, I think that's another word that we call for coincidence, right? As it so happened, While Gehazi was sharing with King Joram how God worked miracles through Elisha, one in particular came to his mind. It's not like he hadn't seen all those other miracles, but this one in particular came to his mind. It was the one where he himself had witnessed with his own 2 eyes, so he could speak with very great authority in this matter. But the greatest authority would be for the king to hear it from the person actually involved. And by amazing coincidence, as they were talking about the child who was risen from the dead, he and his mom just happened to be walking in to see the king. God is totally amazing, isn't he? As if. Think about it now. It took God to orchestrate all those amazing events, including compelling her in the first place to practice hospitality, then compelling Elisha to show gratitude, enabling an old man and his barren wife to conceive and birth a son who would prematurely die, but miraculously be raised back to life, and then be sent away for 7 full years to no fixed address, only to return on the very day, at the very minute, that her testimony would produce the absolute greatest favor in the eyes of the king. That's some amazing coincidence. Not. That is God in action. See, things that he does, just amazing. The same God that directed your steps here this morning has planned something amazing for your story in his story. and he has already announced for you to hear, I know the very plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you, and you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. So what amazing coincidence do you have to share with us this morning as we go into our prayer time? Or how shall we be in prayer for you in this coming week? Do you have an amazing coincidence to share with us? Peter, would you like to take this thing around?